But first, with an election set to be called in days, you'd think a would-be Prime Minister with no track record in foreign affairs or defence would be eager to show his grasp of these critical portfolios, especially at a time like this. Not so today.
It's an uncertain geostrategic region we live in and world we live in. What about your security team? We don't have as much certainty. Will Brendan O'Connor be your Defence Minister?
Look, we have those processes will take place, and I'll make those announcements at the appropriate time rather than at a press conference here. But I have every confidence in the team that I have going into this election. Brendan O'Connor has been outstanding.
He doesn't get to choose. With the powerful factions pulling his strings, Anthony Albanese let pass another opportunity to show Australians he's up to the job of being a worthy national leader. Quite apart from being a slap in the face to the current Shadow Minister Brendan O'Connor, he hasn't exactly got a high profile, it was further evidence that the opposition leader isn't actually in charge of his own party. It's the factions that run Labor, the same factions that have just dumped long-serving frontbencher Senator Kim Carr, forcing him yesterday to announce his political retirement, and that were also about to dump the late Senator Kimberley Kitching because, as an ally of Bill Shorten, she upset the hard left, as well as being far too sensible on defence and national security. Then there was a question about the Solomon Islands and its emerging deal to provide communist China with naval facilities on an island that could disrupt shipping between Australia and the United States. Instead of telling voters what he really thought of China's growing presence in our backyard and what a Labor government might do about it, Albanese launched into a long spiel about climate change.
It is about our level of aid, but it's about much more than that as well. If you go to the Pacific, if you meet with leaders in the Pacific, the first thing they raise with you is not aid, it is climate change. The second thing they raise with you is climate change. The third thing they raise with you is climate change.
If Albanese wants voters to think he's changed from a lifelong leftist warrior to a new middle-of-the-road statesman, today was a chance to reinforce his newly claimed credentials, and he blew it. Pacific Island leaders don't talk to us about more foreign aid, he said. They talk to us about more action on climate change. Well, of course they do, because the latest way to leverage money out of gullible countries like Australia is not to ask for more foreign aid, but to get even more millions under the guise of climate change. Instead of seeking more money for something like housing, let's say, because the Solomon Islands government isn't building enough, Pacific neighbours can just demand more money to storm-proof homes on account of the developed world's supposed responsibility for climate-related natural disasters. It wasn't the question that was climate change, but his answer. Actually, he'd been asked what Australia might do to stop China from building a naval base on our doorstep, and he squibbed it. Another national security moment that went begging because Albanese would rather sprout off about climate change than take on China. It's interesting, though, isn't it, that Pacific nations don't lecture China on climate, even though it's by far the world's biggest emitter and has no interest in limiting its emissions anytime soon. All they want from China is money. Money for prestige projects that no one else will fund, and money for election campaigns and the personal expenses of the big chiefs that Australia's aid budget quite rightly rules out. Australia has a real security challenge in the Pacific, even if Albanese can't grasp it. The epic Battle of the Guadalcanal was fought in the Solomon Islands because Japan knew this was the key to dominating the shipping lanes and isolating Australia. China knows this too, hence its interest in trying to buy the Solomon Islands, to buy their PM and the people, and fund the Prime Minister all the money he needs to stay in office, despite Australian troops and our police still being relied upon to quell outbreaks of disorder as recently as they did in November last year. Successive Australian governments have been far too interested in events they can't control in Europe, the Middle East and East Asia than in what's happening in the South Pacific an area that Australia can and could and should control if we tried. But that would require top-level time and serious attention, not just the occasional announcement and even rarer visit. Albanese could have given a shrewd critique of the government's neglect, but instead he just showed what a novice he remains, and a novice who's starting to feel the pressure. Today's misstep was not on the scale of his total mishandling of the mean girls issue, but it shows his path to the lodge is by no means certain, even if he remains ahead in the polls.